The golden ballroom of the Grand Lexicon shimmered with the kind of artificial brilliance that only extreme wealth can buy. Waiters in white gloves glided through the crowd like ghosts, carrying trays of vintage champagne that cost more than most people earned in a month. Marcus stood at the center of a semicircle of investors, his laughter booming, his teeth flashing like polished ivory under the massive crystal chandeliers. He was a man who had finally arrived, or so he thought. A few paces away, Maya stood by a decorative pillar, her hands clasped tightly around a small evening clutch. She wore a simple, unbranded navy dress that she had tailored to the untrained eye. She was a shadow in a room full of neon lights. She had spent 5 years in these shadows, quietly managing Marcus's schedule, ghostwriting his speeches, and soothing his ego when deals fell through. She did it because she believed in the man she thought he was, a man who loved her for her heart, not her pedigree. "Maya, darling, you look comfortable," a voice purred behind her. Maya turned to see Elena, draped in a crimson gown that looked like a spilled glass of expensive wine. Elena's neck was heavy with diamonds that caught the light with every practiced tilt of her head. She was the daughter of a rival developer, and for the last 6 months, she had been Marcus's consultant. "It's a long night, Elena. Comfort is a priority," Maya replied, her voice soft but steady. "Is it?" Elena smirked, her eyes darting toward the podium where Marcus was now heading. "I always thought a woman's priority should be matching the stature of the man beside her, but I suppose some people just don't have the range." Marcus tapped the microphone, and the room fell into a respectful silence. He looked every bit the conqueror in his bespoke tuxedo. "Friends, colleagues, and titans of industry," Marcus began, his voice amplified and dripping with confidence. "Tonight is a celebration of growth. To build a skyscraper, you have to clear the lot. You have to remove the old, crumbling structures to make room for the steel and glass of the future." Maya felt a cold shiver trace down her spine. Marcus's eyes found hers, but there was no warmth in them, only a chilling, clinical detachment. "I have spent 5 years building my firm," Marcus continued, "and in that time I've realized that a man of my caliber needs a partner who scales with his ambition. A man of my caliber needs a queen who commands a room, not a placeholder who hides in the corners." A ripple of uneasy whispers moved through the crowd. Marcus gestured to a server, who approached Maya with a silver tray. On it sat a single, heavy vellum envelope. "Maya," Marcus said, his voice echoing through the ballroom, "you were the dirt I started in, but I am the diamond now. I am moving into a world where you simply don't fit. You're a thrift store soul in a luxury world, and I'm officially cutting the dead weight." The tray was thrust toward her. Maya's fingers trembled as she took the envelope. She didn't need to open it to know it was the divorce paper. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing the air from her lungs as the elite of the city watched her with a mixture of pity and smug amusement. Marcus didn't wait for her to speak. He reached out his hand, and Elena glided up the stairs to join him on the podium. He pulled her close, his hand possessively on her waist. "Meet the new face of my future," he announced. Maya looked up at them. The pain was there, sharp and searing, but beneath it, something else was flickering to life. It was the cold, hard realization that her experiment was over. She had tried to find a love that didn't care about the Newsome name, and she had found a man who cared only for the image of it. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she simply turned and walked toward the massive oak doors of the ballroom. Behind her, she heard Marcus's laughter resume, punctuated by the clinking of glasses, celebrating her absence. Once she reached the cold night air of the terrace, Maya pulled her phone from her clutch. Her thumb hovered over a contact she hadn't dialed in half a decade. The phone rang only once, before a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Maya, Dad," she said, her voice dropping the softness she had maintained for Marcus, and replacing it with the steel of a Newsome. "The test is over." He failed. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "My driver is already at the gate, Maya," Ronald Newsome said, his voice tight with a father's protective rage. "It's time to come home. It's time to show him what stature really looks like." Maya looked back at the glowing windows of the ballroom. Marcus thought he had just upgraded his life, but he had actually just discarded the only thing keeping his world from imploding. As a sleek black car pulled up to the curb, the driver stepped out and bowed deeply. "Welcome back, Miss Newsome," he whispered. Maya stepped into the car, the simple blue dress disappearing into the darkness of the leather interior. The dirt was gone. The heiress had returned. The black sedan glided away from the Grand Lexicon, leaving the muffled sounds of Marcus's laughter and the clinking of celebratory crystal far behind. Inside the car, the air was cool and smelled of expensive leather and cedarwood, a stark contrast to the stifling, perfume-heavy atmosphere of the ballroom. Maya sat in the back seat, her back straight, staring at the blurred lights of the city streaking past the window. In her hand, the heavy vellum envelope felt like a lead weight, a physical manifestation of 5 years of wasted devotion. She looked down at her phone. The screen was still glowing with the call log. She had spent half a decade trying to prove that her heart was worth more than her bank account, living in cramped apartments and wearing off-the-rack clothes just to ensure that the man she loved saw her, not the Newsome legacy. Marcus had seen her. All right, he had seen a place where he had seen dirt. Her thumb hovered over the screen. For years she had ignored the monthly check-ins and the subtle pleas to return to the family fold. She had wanted to be Maya, the independent woman. Now, she realized that by shrinking herself to keep Marcus comfortable, she had only fed a monster. The phone vibrated in her hand before she could even initiate the dial. The caller ID didn't need a name. The private encrypted number was burned into her memory. Maya took a deep breath, the simple blue fabric of her dress tightening across her chest as she exhaled the last of her grief. She answered the phone, pressing it to her ear with a hand that had finally stopped shaking. Maya. The voice on the other end was a low, resonant rumble, the voice of a man who moved markets with a whisper and crushed competitors with a glance. Ronald Newsome didn't sound like a tycoon now, though. He sounded like a father who had been holding his breath for 5 years. "My security detail at the Lexicon just radioed in. They said you left through the service exit. They said you were alone." Maya closed her eyes, leaning her head against the cool glass of the window. "I'm alone, Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking just once before the Newsome steel took over. "But I'm not small anymore." "Did he do it?" Ronald's voice dropped an octave, a dangerous edge creeping into his tone. "Did he take the bait?" "He didn't just take it. He threw me away in front of everyone," Maya said, a bitter smile touching her lip. "He told me I was the dead weight holding him back from his true potential. He's with Elena Cole now. He thinks she's his ticket to the inner circle." A heavy silence hung on the line. Maya could almost picture her father in his vast, mahogany-lined study, his eyes narrowing as he calculated the precise force required to dismantle Marcus's world. "He chose the wrong queen, Maya," Ronald said firmly. "He spent 5 years with a lioness and treated her like a stray. Now, he'll have to learn what happens when the pride comes home." Maya looked at her reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back wasn't the timid wife who apologized for her husband's temper or hid her intelligence to avoid bruising his ego. This was a woman who had been tested by fire and found herself to be unbreakable. She thought about the tiny apartment Marcus had complained about, the thrift store life she had curated to keep their existence humble. It was a cage she had built for herself, and Marcus had just handed her the key. "I tried to live a normal life, Dad. I really did," Maya said, her voice growing stronger with every word. "I wanted to believe that love was enough, but he didn't want love. He wanted power, and if it's power he wants, I think it's time he learns who actually holds it." "So," Ronald said, his tone shifting from protective father to the architect of an empire, "what are your orders, Maya?" Maya gripped the phone, her gaze hardening as the car turned onto the long private road leading toward the Newsome estate. The wrought iron gates,
bearing the family crest Marcus had so desperately tried to emulate, swung open with silent mechanical precision. "I'm done hiding," Maya said, her voice echoing with a newfound authority. "Tell the legal team to freeze the holding company that owns his office building. Inform the board at Newsome Tech that the anonymous grant for his startup is terminated, effective immediately. And Dad?" "Yes, I'm coming home," she said, the words a vow and a threat combined. "And tomorrow, I want my seat at the head of the table." The car slowed to a halt in front of the massive limestone facade of the Newsome mansion. The front doors swung open, spilling warm, amber light across the driveway. As Maya stepped out of the sedan, the simple blue dress she wore no longer looked like the garment of a pauper. Against the backdrop of the palace she was born to rule, it looked like the understated uniform of a woman who no longer needed to prove her worth to anyone. She didn't look back at the city. She didn't look back at the life she had left behind. Marcus wanted a queen who commanded a room. He was about to find out that Maya Newsome commanded the world. The morning sun crept into the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marcus's new penthouse, but the warmth felt strangely absent. He stood in his kitchen, wearing a silk robe that cost more than Maya's entire yearly wardrobe, admiring the way the light hit his gold watch. Last night had been a triumph. The divorce was public, the dead weight was gone, and Elena was asleep in the master suite. He was finally the man he was always meant to be. He reached for his phone to check the overnight market open, but a notification on his screen stopped him cold. It was a high-priority alert from his primary bank. He tapped it, expecting a routine confirmation of his recent expansion loan. Instead, the screen displayed a stark red banner: "Account status restricted. Please contact your private banking representative." Marcus scoffed, sliding a finger over the glass. "Glitch in the system," he muttered to the empty kitchen. He pulled up his business line ready to call his broker, but found a second notification waiting. This one was from his firm's CFO. It was marked urgent in all caps. "Marcus, something is wrong. The $50 million credit line for the South Side project was pulled at 4:30. No explanation. The bank just cited internal risk realignment. "We're over-leveraged. If that cash isn't liquid by noon, the contractors will..." A cold knot began to tie itself in Marcus's stomach. He dialed his CFO immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail, unheard of for a man who lived and breathed Marcus's payroll. He tried again. Nothing. He paced the marble floor, his breath coming shorter. He dialed his lead investor, a man named Henderson who had been his biggest cheerleader for 3 years. The phone rang once, twice, and then a click. "Henderson, thank God. I'm seeing some weird movement on the credit lines." "Marcus," Henderson interrupted, his voice sounding thin and brittle as if he were speaking from a bunker. "I can't talk to you." "What do you mean you can't talk to me? We have a board meeting on Tuesday. We're about to break ground." "The word is out, Marcus," Henderson hissed, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "I don't know who you crossed, but the directive came from the very top. Not just my top, the top. If I'm seen even taking a lunch with you, my firm is blacklisted by new. Don't call this number again." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone as if it were a poisonous snake. He felt a sudden sharp ringing in his ear. Henderson was a powerhouse in the city. For him to sound like a cornered animal meant the predator was something Marcus couldn't even visualize. He scrambled to his laptop, his fingers flying across the keys as he tried to access his offshore holdings, the secret stash he'd built while Maya was busy clipping coupons and stretching their grocery budget. He entered the 16-digit encryption code, but the screen didn't move to the dashboard. A simple black text box appeared in the center of the white screen. "Access denied. Assets under legal review by Newsome Global Holdings." Marcus froze. Newsome, the name hit him like a physical blow. Newsome was the sun that the entire financial system orbited. They didn't deal with small-cap firms like his. They didn't even acknowledge his existence. Why would a trillion-dollar empire be looking at his piddling offshore accounts? His phone began to vibrate incessantly on the counter. It was Elena. "Marcus," she shrieked the moment he answered. "My father just called. He's hysterical. He said our engagement is over. He said if I don't move out of your place in the next hour, he's cutting my inheritance to 0. He said you're toxic." "Marcus, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything," Marcus roared, his face turning a deep panicked purple. Everything was perfect last night. I'm the same man I was 8 hours ago. Apparently not. Elena snapped, her voice devoid of the honeyed warmth she'd used at the gala. My father said, the Newsom family just put a kill order on your reputation. He won't even say why. He's just scared, Marcus. And if he's scared, I'm gone. Marcus listened to the click of the line and felt the world begin to tilt. He looked around his expensive penthouse, and for the first time it didn't look like a palace. It looked like a gilded cage with the door locked from the outside. He thought back to the ballroom. He thought of Maya in her simple blue dress, walking away without a single tear. He remembered the way she looked at him, not with anger, but with a terrifying quiet pity. He grabbed his jacket, his hands shaking so violently he could barely find the sleeves. He needed to get to the office. He needed to see his partner. He needed to find out how a thrift store girl like Maya could leave his life, and in less than 12 hours, the most powerful shadow in the world could move in to replace her. As he ran toward the elevator, he didn't see the black sedan parked across the street. He didn't see the man in the suit making a note on a digital tablet. He only felt the sudden bone-chilling cold of a man whose credit had run out in a world where money was the only thing that kept you warm. The scent of expensive perfume and desperation hung heavy in the penthouse air as Elena paced the length of the living room, her designer heels clicking like a countdown against the marble floor. The triumph she had radiated at the gala had curdled into a sharp, jagged anxiety. She wasn't looking at Marcus with adoration anymore. She was looking at him like a bad investment she was preparing to dump. Marcus sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, his head in his hand. The silence of the apartment was deafening, broken only by the occasional chime of his phone, each notification another nail in the coffin of his career. Every major partner had gone dark. The Newsom freeze was no longer a theory. It was a localized ice age, and Marcus was at the epicenter. My father called again, Elena said, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. She stopped pacing and turned to him, her eyes cold. He's already started the process of removing my name from the family trust. He says that being associated with you right now is like hugging a sinking ship. He wants me out of here. Marcus, 10 minutes ago. Marcus looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Elena, it's just a temporary glitch. Someone, maybe a rival, maybe Maya's mysterious friends, is pulling some strings. I just need a few days to navigate the PR. We still have the Southside project. No, you don't, Elena snapped, throwing a tablet onto the coffee table. The contractors pulled out an hour ago. They didn't even ask for the cancellation fee. They just vanished. And that mysterious string puller isn't just anyone. My father heard the name Newsom whispered in 3 different boardrooms this morning. Newsom. Marcus, do you have any idea what that means? Marcus felt a bead of sweat roll down his temple. I know who they are, Elena, but I've never even met a Newsom. Why would they care about me? Elena let out a harsh, mocking laugh. It doesn't matter why they care. It matters that they've erased you. And if you think I'm going to spend my life living in a thrift store reality because you've become a pariah, you're more delusional than I. She walked over to him, leaning down until she was inches from his face, the diamonds at her throat glittering with a predatory light. You wanted a queen, Marcus. A queen needs a kingdom. If you want me to stay, you fix this. Now. How? Marcus whispered, his bravado finally fracturing. You find a way into Newsom Global, she demanded, her voice a low hiss. My father says they are looking for a new domestic partner for their infrastructure wing. If you can secure even a preliminary meeting, a single signature on a Newsom letterhead, the freeze will break. People will think the Newsoms have blessed you and the banks will open back up. Elena, that's impossible. I can't just walk into the Newsom Tower and ask for a partnership. Marcus stammered. Then you're useless to me, she said, straightening up and looking toward the bedroom where her luggage was already half packed. I give you 24 hours. Secure a seat at that table, or don't bother calling me again. I didn't leave my social standing for a man who can't keep his bank account in the black. She turned her back on him, leaving Marcus alone with the crushing weight of her ultimatum. He looked at his phone, the device that used to be his scepter of power, now just a piece of glass and plastic that refused to ring. He thought of Maya again, how she would have stayed, how she would have offered a quiet word of comfort instead of a threat. But he had traded the anchor for a sail, and now the storm was tearing him apart. Driven by a frantic, blind hope, Marcus grabbed his keys. He would go to the Newsom headquarters. He would beg. He would bribe. He would wait in the lobby for days if he had. He didn't realize that the woman he was trying so hard to impress was currently sitting in the very office he was about to storm, and she was the one who had written the script for his downfall. The afternoon sun glinted off the polished glass of Fifth Avenue, but the light felt like a spotlight on Marcus's desperation. He had spent the last 4 hours being rebuffed by receptionists, who didn't even bother to look up from their screens when he mentioned his name. His tie was slightly crooked, and the sweat under his bespoke suit was turning cold. He was heading toward the Newsom Global Tower, his last-ditch effort to save his crumbling empire, when a flash of movement caught his eye across the street. Emerging from the arched marble entrance of L'Héritage, the city's most exclusive invitation-only boutique, was a woman who stopped him in his tracks. She was draped in a tailored coat of cream cashmere that seemed to glow against the pavement. Her hair was swept up in a sophisticated chignon, and she moved with a quiet, lethal grace that commanded the sidewalk. Marcus blinked, his jaw dropping. It was Maya, but it wasn't the Maya he had dumped 48 hours ago. Gone was the simple blue dress, and the nervous downward gaze. This woman looked like she owned the street she walked on. Behind her, 2 staff members followed, carrying several sleek minimalist shopping bags embossed with the gold L'Héritage crest. A surge of white-hot rage and disbelief washed over Marcus. He didn't see a transformation. He saw the woman who had supposedly lived on his charity for 5 years suddenly flaunting wealth he no longer possessed. He crossed the street, dodging a yellow cab, his face contorting into a sneer. "Maya," he barked, his voice cutting through the hum of traffic. Maya, she didn't flinch. She slowly turned her head, her expression as calm as a deep lake. When her eyes met his, there was no fear, no longing, and most devastatingly for Marcus, no anger. There was only a cold, distant curiosity. "Marcus," she said softly, "you look frazzled." Marcus ignored the comment, stepping into her personal space and gesturing wildly at the bags behind her. "Frazzled? I'm working, Maya. While you're out here doing what? Playing dress up?" He let out a harsh, jagged laugh. "How did you even get into that store? Did you sneak in the back? Or did you find some poor fool to pay for those bags the second I kicked you out?" Maya's security detail stepped forward, but she raised a slender hand to stay them. "I'm here on business, Marcus. Something you seem to be struggling with lately." "Business?" "Marcus, you don't have business. You have my money, or you've stolen someone else's." He grabbed the edge of one of the bags, his fingers digging into the expensive paper. "This coat, these bags. This is a crime. L'Héritage doesn't sell to waitresses and orphans. You're a fraud, I should call the police right now and have them watch you crawl back to the gutter where I found you." The boutique manager, a woman known for being the most terrifyingly elite gatekeeper in the fashion world, stepped out of the store. She looked at Marcus, as if he were a smudge on a window. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" she asked Maya, her voice thick with genuine reverence. "Madame," Marcus scoffed, turning to the manager. "This woman is my ex-wife. She has no bank account, no standing, and certainly no business in your store. You might want to check if your inventory is missing." The manager didn't even look at Marcus. She kept her eyes on Maya. "Shall I call security to remove this person from the sidewalk, Madame?" "Newsom." Marcus froze. The air seemed to leave the street. "Madame?" "What?" Maya looked at Marcus, and for the first time, a small chilling smile played on her lips. It wasn't the smile of the woman he had married. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey realize it was already caught. "You always told me I didn't fit the luxury world, Marcus," Maya said, her voice smooth as silk. "You were right, I don't fit into it. I provide the foundation for it. You see, I didn't just shop here today. I've been reviewing the quarterly report. L'Héritage is a subsidiary of Newsom Global, which means in a very literal sense, I own the coat, I own the bags, and I own the very ground you're standing on." Marcus's hand fell away from the bag. His face went from a heated red to a ghostly translucent white. You're a Newsom." No, that's impossible. You lived in that apartment with me. You ate cheap takeout. You wore me. I wore what I wanted to wear to see if you loved me." Maya interrupted, her tone dropping into a deadly quiet register. "I lived small so I could see how big your heart was. It turns out your heart is even smaller than that apartment, Marcus." She signaled to her driver, and a sleek, armored Rolls-Royce pulled up to the curb. The staff began loading her bags into the trunk with practiced efficiency. "Wait," Marcus stammered, his mind racing. If she was a Newsom, then the freeze, the credit lines, the blacklisting. It all made sense. "Maya, listen, I didn't mean." Things were tense. We can talk about this, if you're a Newsome. We can merge. Think of the power we could have. Maya paused at the door of the car. She looked at him. Not as a former husband but as a minor nuisance. We aren't merging, Marcus. We're submerged, and you're the one underwater. She stepped into the vehicle and the door closed with a heavy, expensive thud. Marcus stood alone on the sidewalk, the shadow of the boutique looming over him. He watched the car pull away into the Manhattan traffic, realizing that the queen he had been hunting for was the one he had just handed a divorce decree. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his CFO. The office building has been locked down. They're saying the owner revoked our lease. We're on the street, Marcus. Marcus looked back at the Loritas shine. He wasn't the diamond. He was the dirt, and Maya Newsome was about to bury him. The morning air felt like a tightening noose as Marcus stood before the towering steel and glass facade of the Zenith Investment Group. This was his final play, the Hail Mary that would supposedly fix everything. He had spent the entire night refining a pitch deck, drinking black coffee until his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. If he could convince the Zenith board to bridge his funding gap, he could bypass the Newsome free. He just needed one win. One tiny crack in the armor Maya had built around the city.
He checked his reflection in the lobby's polished granite. He looked pale, his eyes rimmed with red, but he straightened his shoulders. He was Marcus Walker. He was a closer. He didn't lose. Floor 44. Mr. Walker, the receptionist said. Her voice was devoid of the warmth he usually received at this firm. She didn't offer him a guest badge. She just pointed toward the elevator bank, as if he were a courier, delivering a package he was about to be late for. As the elevator ascended, Marcus rehearsed his opening line. Gentlemen, risk is just an opportunity dressed in a suit. He felt a surge of his old arrogance. Maya was just a woman playing at being powerful. She couldn't possibly control every investor in Manhattan. The world was too big, and her father's reach had to have limits. The doors chimed and slid open. The reception area of Zenith was silent, unusually silent. Usually this floor was a hive of shouting traders and clicking keyboards, but today the air was stagnant. He walked toward the main boardroom, his leather soles echoing loudly on the hardwood floor. He pushed the heavy frosted glass doors open, his mouth already forming the first words of his pitch. Gentlemen, I appreciate you seeing me on such short notice. The words died in his throat. The boardroom was massive, dominated by a 30-foot table of reclaimed oak that shone under recessed lights, but there were no investors, no venture capitalists, no Henderson, no board members. The 20 leather chairs were pushed neatly into the table, empty and haunting. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning. Marcus stood at the head of the room, clutching his leather portfolio so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Hello," he called out. His voice bounced off the glass walls, mocking him. "Is this some kind of joke? We had a 10 o'clock. He walked toward the center of the table, his eyes darting around the room, as if expecting the board to jump out and reveal a prank. But the room remained a tomb. Then he saw it. At the very end of the long table, placed precisely in front of the chairman's seat, was a single sheet of heavy cream-colored stationery. It wasn't a business contract or a bank statement. It was a handwritten note. Marcus approached the paper with the dread of a condemned man, walking toward the gallows. He picked it up. The stationery felt thick and expensive, the Newsome Global crest embossed at the top in subtle, colorless ink. The note was short, written in a graceful, sharp cursive that he recognized instantly. He had seen that handwriting on grocery lists and anniversary cards for 5 years. "Marcus," the note read, "you spent years looking for the titans of industry, never realizing you were sleeping next to one. You wanted a board of directors to validate your worth. Here they are. They aren't here because I told them not to be. They aren't here because your name is now a synonym for obsolete. I didn't have to break your business, Marcus. I just stopped lending you my light. Look around the room. This is what your future looks like. Empty. Quiet. Cold. Signed." Marcus let the paper fall from his fingers. It drifted to the floor, landing softly on the plush carpet. He looked at the empty chairs again, and suddenly they didn't look like furniture. They looked like a jury that had already delivered a verdict in absentia.
He realized then that Maya hadn't just blocked his calls or frozen his bank accounts. She had erased his existence from the ecosystem of the city. To these men, Marcus wasn't a rival or an enemy. He was a ghost that had been exorcised by the woman he had called deadweight. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A final, pathetic vibration. It was a notification from his landlord. The electronic lock on his penthouse had been deactivated. His belongings were being moved to a storage facility in the outer boroughs. The Newsome shadow hadn't just covered him. It had swallowed him whole. He slumped into one of the empty chairs, the leather creaking under his weight. For 5 years he had believed he was the architect of his own success. He finally understood the truth. He had been living in a house built by Maya, and she had just decided to take the roof back. The sky over Manhattan was a bruised purple, heavy with the promise of rain. As Marcus stood on the sidewalk outside his penthouse building, he was no longer the master of the glass tower. He was a spectator. 2 men in charcoal suits stood like stone pillars in front of the lobby doors, their expressions as impassive as the granite walls behind them. Beside Marcus, 3 oversized cardboard boxes sat on the damp concrete, the unceremonious remains of his life. A gold-plated desk clock, a few pairs of Italian shoes, and a framed photo of himself shaking hands with a senator. "You can't do this," Marcus hissed, his voice cracking with a desperation that made him sound small. "I have a lease. I have right." The lease was held by a subsidiary of Hale Holdings. One of the guards replied, his voice a mechanical drone. "The subsidiary was liquidated this morning. The property has been reclaimed. Move along, Mr. Walker. You're obstructing the entry." Marcus felt the first drop of rain hit his forehead. It felt like a cold needle. He looked at the boxes, then at the street, realizing that for the first time in a decade he had nowhere to go. His credit cards were plastic shrapnel in his wallet, and his digital footprint had been scrubbed clean. He had 1 card left to play. He hailed a taxi, using the last of the crumpled bills in his pocket, to get to the Cole estate. Elena's father, Arthur Cole, was a man of ambition. Surely Arthur would see the logic in helping him. If they pooled their resources, they could fight the Newsome monopoly. He just needed a place to stand while he swung the sword. The Cole mansion was a sprawling neoclassical fortress in the hills, guarded by iron gates that usually hummed open the moment Marcus's car appeared. Today the gates remained shut. Marcus stepped out of the cab and pressed the intercom button. He pressed it again, and again. "Arthur, it's Marcus. Open the gate," he shouted into the speaker. After a long agonizing silence, the speaker crackled to life. It wasn't Arthur's voice. It was a security chief Maya had likely never met, but who knew exactly who Marcus was. "Mr. Cole is not receiving visitors, Walker, especially not you." "Listen to me," Marcus screamed, his face reddening. "I need to speak with Elena. We're engaged. Tell Arthur I have a plan to bypass the Newsome freeze." The gates groaned, and for a second, hope surged in Marcus's chest, but the gates didn't open for him. Instead, a silver SUV rolled down the driveway and stopped just inside the bars. The window slid down, revealing Arthur Cole's weathered, aristocratic face. He didn't look angry. He looked terrified. "Arthur, thank God," Marcus started, reaching through the bars. "We can fix this. I just need a short-term loan and a guest room." "Get away from my gate, Marcus," Arthur said, his voice trembling with a suppressed rage. "Do you have any idea what you've done? My company's stock dropped 20 points this morning just because a paparazzo caught a photo of you and Elena at that gala. The Newsome Group didn't just freeze you. They sent a memo to every firm on the East Coast. Anyone who shelters Marcus Walker will be treated as an enemy of the Newsome family." "Arthur, we're family, Elena and I." "Elena is on a flight to Zurich," Arthur interrupted, his eyes cold and hollow. "She doesn't want to see you. She doesn't want to know you. You aren't a man anymore, Marcus. You're a virus, and I won't let you infect my legacy. You're a coward," Marcus roared, rattling the iron bars. "Maya is just a girl. We can take her." Arthur leaned forward, his face inches from the bars. "She's not just a girl, you fool. She's the daughter of Ronald Newsome, and more importantly, she's the woman you humiliated in front of the world." A girl would want revenge. A Newsome wants a vacuum. They don't want to kill you, Marcus. They want to make it so you never exist. The window slid up, sealing Marcus out in the cold. The SUV backed away, returning to the safety of the mansion. Marcus stood alone in the rain, his expensive suit soaking through, sticking to his skin like a shroud. He looked down at his hands, The hands that were supposed to build an empire, they were empty. He realized then the true weight of the beggar's choice. He could keep fighting a war he had already lost, or he could disappear into the shadows he had once looked down upon. As he turned to walk back down the long winding road toward the city, he saw a black car idling in the distance. He didn't know if it was protection or surveillance, but he knew one thing. Maya was watching. She was watching him realize that in the world of the Newsomes, he wasn't even a footnote. He was just a mistake that was currently being erased. The rain had turned into a thick, clinging mist by the time Marcus retreated to the only place he had left. A windowless room in a motel that smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. He sat on the edge of a bed with sagging springs, staring at the 3 cardboard boxes that contained his entire life. His phone was a useless slab of glass, without a service plan or a bank account to back it. He was digitally invisible. He felt like a ghost haunting the ruins of his own ambition. He reached into the pocket of his soaked blazer and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper he had found tucked into the side of one of his boxes. A stray cream-colored envelope that the movers must have swept up by mistake from his penthouse mail slot. It was heavy, the paper feeling like velvet between his shaking fingers. He opened it slowly and his breath caught. It was an invitation to the Newsome Foundation Gala, the most exclusive event of the decade. The card was embossed with real gold leaf, and the name Marcus Walker was printed in elegant script. It was a pity invite, likely sent weeks ago when he was still considered a rising star, or perhaps it was a final cruel joke from the Newsome legal team. To anyone else, it was a social obligation. To Marcus, it looked like a life raft. His mind, fueled by the manic energy of the truly desperate, began to spin a new narrative. He didn't see a trap. He saw a stage. If he could just get inside that room, he could find Ronald Newsome. He would explain that he had been a victim of a misunderstanding. He would charm the old man, show him the fire and the drive that had brought him this far. He would tell him that Maya was too emotional, that she was destroying business value out of spite, and that a man like Ronald would respect a man like Marcus for his ruthlessness. "I just need 5 minutes," Marcus whispered to the yellowing wallpaper. 5 minutes to show him I'm one of them. He spent the next hour meticulously cleaning his one remaining suit. He used the motel's iron to press his shirt until the collar was sharp enough to draw blood. He polished his shoes with a damp rag until they reflected the dim overhead light. He looked in the cracked mirror and practiced his smile, the $1,000,000 smile that had convinced banks to give him millions. It looked hollow now, a mask stretched over a face that had aged 10 years in 3 days. But it was all he had. He didn't have money for a cab, so he walked 3 miles through the cold evening air, his heart thumping a frantic rhythm against his ribs. As he approached the Newsome Plaza, the street was a river of black limousines and silver sports cars. The air hummed with the sound of violin music and the low, sophisticated murmur of the world's elite. Marcus smoothed his jacket and stepped into the line of guests. He saw faces he recognized: senators, tech moguls, the very board members who had left him sitting in an empty room 48 hours ago. They didn't see him. He was a shadow moving among giants. At the entrance, a security detail equipped with earpieces and scanners checked invitations with the precision of border guards. Marcus felt a cold sweat break out on his neck. He handed his crumpled gold-leafed card to the lead guard. The man scanned the barcode, his eyes flicking to a tablet screen. There was a long, agonizing pause. Marcus held his breath, his closer smile locked into place. The guard looked at the screen, then at Marcus's slightly damp shoes, and finally at his face. For a moment, Marcus was sure he would be tackled, handcuffed, and tossed into the street. "Entry confirmed," the guard said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Welcome to the Newsome Gala, Mr. Walker." The doors swung open and Marcus stepped into a world of blinding light. The ballroom was a cathedral of glass and gold, filled with the scent of lilies and the sparkle of 1,000 diamonds. He felt a surge of intoxicating triumph. He was in. He had breached the fortress. He scanned the room, his eyes searching for the tall, silver-haired figure of Ronald Newsome. He didn't see Maya anywhere, and he took that as a sign of her weakness. She was probably hiding, too afraid to face the high society peers she had tried to lie to. He grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing tray, the bubbles stinging his throat, and began to move through the crowd. He didn't notice the way the room seemed to go quiet as he passed. He didn't see the way the guests shifted their positions, creating a subtle empty path for him, as if he were a leper in a palace. He only saw the high ceiling and the gold-leafed walls. He believed he was moments away from his second chance. He believed he was about to win his life back. He didn't realize that the invitation wasn't a life raft, it was a summon, and the pity he felt from the room wasn't for his fall. It was for the fact that he was the only person in the building who didn't know he was the theme's main attraction. The air in the grand ballroom felt thick with the scent of lilies and the suffocating weight of $500 an ounce perfume. Marcus moved through the crowd like a shark in shallow water, his eyes fixed on the far end of the hall where the inner sanctum of power had formed a tight circle. At the center of that circle stood Ronald Newsom. He was taller than he appeared in the business journals, a pillar of silver-haired authority draped in a tuxedo that seemed to absorb the light of the chandeliers. Marcus felt his pulse thrumming in his ears. This was the moment. The closer in him took the lead, pushing down the memory of the motel room and the rain-soaked cardboard boxes. He smoothed his lapels one last time and began to shoulder his way through the gathered titans. As he approached, the conversation around Ronald died a sudden, unnatural death. The guests parted with a synchronized grace, creating a vacuum that sucked Marcus toward the center. Ronald Newsom turned slowly, a crystal glass of amber liquid in his hand. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man watching a predictable insect crawl onto his dinner plate. "Miss Newsom," Marcus said, his voice pitched for maximum confidence, his hand extended in a practiced gesture of brotherhood. "I'm Marcus Walker. I've been trying to reach your office to discuss a massive oversight regarding the Southside project. I believe there's been a misunderstanding, a personal matter, that has spilled over into the professional sphere. I'm here to set the record straight." Ronald didn't take the hand. He didn't even acknowledge its existence. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his drink, his eyes scanning Marcus from his slightly scuffed shoes to his desperate, smiling face. "Walker," Ronald said, the name sounding like a slur in his mouth. "I've heard of you. You're the man who thinks a tailor and a loud voice make him appear. You're the man who spent 5 years with a treasure and treated it like a burden." Marcus' smile faltered, but he pushed forward, the desperation rising in his throat like bile. "Sir, with all due respect, Maya, she's using your family's resources to settle a domestic dispute. It's bad business." "Ronald, a man like you, a man of logic and legacy, surely you see that I'm the one who can actually deliver value. I'm the one who built that firm from nothing." A low, rumbling chuckle started in Ronald's chest. It wasn't a warm sound. It was the sound of a landslide. A few people in the crowd joined in, their laughter sharp and mocking. "You built nothing," Ronald said, his voice dropping into a register that made the floor seem to vibrate. "Every brick in your office, every cent in your account, every connection you ever made was a gift. My family has been subsidizing your mediocrity for half a decade, because my daughter asked us to. She wanted to see if you were a man of character. She wanted to see if you could be loved without a price tag. I didn't know," Marcus stammered, his hand finally dropping to his side. "If I had known she was your daughter." "That's exactly the point, isn't it?" Ronald interrupted. He leaned in closer, his gaze predatory. "You only respect the shadow of the mountain, never the mountain itself. You look for the brand, never the soul. And now you've come here to beg for a second chance, to charm me into a partnership. I just want a seat at the table," Marcus whispered, the ballroom suddenly feeling very hot. Ronald stepped back, a cruel mocking smile touching his lips. "I don't deal with trash, Marcus. I never have. My time is far too valuable to spend on a man who throws away a diamond because he's too blind to see the spark." He paused, looking over Marcus's shoulder toward the grand staircase that overlooked the ballroom. "But I'm not the person you need to convince. I'm just the chairman. If you want a seat at the table, you'll have to talk to my boss." Marcus blinked, confused. "Your boss? You're Ronald Newsom. There is no one above you. In this company, there is one," Ronald replied. The orchestra suddenly stopped their melodic background hum, and struck a single resonant chord. Every head in the ballroom turned toward the staircase. A spotlight, brilliant and unforgiving, cut through the amber glow and landed on the landing. Maya stood there. She wasn't wearing the simple blue dress of a wife, nor the cashmere coat of a shop. She was draped in a gown of midnight blue silk that looked like it had been spun from the evening sky itself. Around her neck sat the Newsom star, a diamond the size of a bird's egg that radiated a cold celestial fire. Her hair was a crown of dark waves, and her face was a mask of regal, terrifying calm. She didn't look like the woman Marcus had dumped. She looked like a deity who had descended to earth to witness a sacrifice. As she began to descend the stairs, the crowd bowed their heads in a wave of instinctive respect. Marcus felt his knees grow weak. The air seemed to leave his lungs as she reached the bottom, and walked directly toward the circle. The guests stepped back, leaving only Marcus, Ronald and the woman who held the world in her hands. Maya stopped in front of him. She didn't look angry. She looked at him with the same clinical indifference one might show to a broken piece of machinery. "Miss Walker," she said, her voice amplified by the silence of the room, "I believe you were looking for a partnership." Marcus couldn't speak. His mouth was dry, his mind a shattered mess of what-ifs. And if only. He looked at her, and for the first time he saw the Newsome legacy not as a bank account, but as the iron-willed strength in her eyes. "You told me I didn't fit your life, Marcus," Maya said, her voice smooth and lethal. "You told me you needed a queen. Well, here I am. But a queen doesn't partner with a servant who betrayed his post. She simply replaces him." She turned to her father, ignoring Marcus entirely. "Dad, the board is waiting in the library. Let's finish the acquisition of Walker Infrastructure. I want it dissolved by midnight." Ronald nodded, offering his arm to his daughter. As they turned to leave, Maya paused and looked back over her shoulder at the man standing frozen in the center of the room. "Security will see you out, Marcus," she said quietly. "Don't bother leaving your card. We already know exactly what you're worth." And as it turns out, it's nothing. The cold morning light of Manhattan did not bring the clarity Marcus had hoped for. Instead, it illuminated the jagged edges of a life that had been systematically dismantled. He stood on the sidewalk across from the Newsome Global Tower, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a coat that was now his only shield against the world. Two security guards, their faces as expressionless as the building's steel facade, watched him from the lobby. They didn't need to move. The invisible barrier between Marcus and the elite was now more impenetrable than any wall. His phone, which had been silent for days, suddenly buzzed with a single notification. It was an email from a legal firm he didn't recognize. The subject line was cold: "Final settlement of debt." With trembling fingers he opened it. It was a ledger, a terrifyingly precise list of every loan, every line of credit, and every mortgage he had ever signed. At the bottom, where the total should have been, was a stamp that read, "Acquired by Newsome Asset Management." Before he could process the implications, a black town car pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down halfway, revealing Maya. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at a digital tablet, her fingers moving with the efficiency of a general directing a campaign. "Get in, Marcus," she said, her voice barely rising above the hum of the engine. "We have one last piece of business." The ride was silent. Marcus sat in the back of the car, feeling like a prisoner being transported to his final sentencing. He looked at Maya, the sharp line of her jaw, the way she commanded the space around her, and realized that the woman he had tried to mold had actually been his architect all along. They arrived at a nondescript office in the legal district, far from the gold-leafed ballrooms of the previous night. Inside, a single lawyer waited with a stack of documents. "I'm not putting you in jail, Marcus," Maya said, finally meeting his eyes as she sat across from him. Her gaze was neither angry nor vengeful. It was the look of a person closing a book they no longer intended to read. "Jail would give you a story. It would give you a reason to feel like a martyr, and I don't want you to have a story." She slid a document across the table. It was a non-disclosure and non-compete agreement, so restrictive, it effectively erased his professional identity. "I have bought every cent of your debt," she continued, her tone clinical. "The millions you owe to the banks, the contractors you failed to pay, the taxes you tried to dodge. It all belongs to me now. In exchange for your silence and your total exit from the corporate world, I will not collect. You will live, but you will live in the quiet. You will never hold a director's title. You will never be featured in a journal. You will never step foot in a room where decisions are made. You're erasing me," Marcus whispered, the realization hitting him harder than any bankruptcy. "I'm giving you what you pretended to have," Maya corrected him. "You wanted to be a self-made man. Now you get to start from absolute zero. Without the Newsome safety net you never knew you had. You can work, you can eat, you can exist, but the world of the elite is closed to you. To them, you aren't a failure. You're simply gone." Marcus looked at the pen. He looked at the woman who had once been his sanctuary, the woman he had called plain and unemployed. He signed the paper. As the ink dried, he felt the last tether to his old life. Maya stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. "One last thing," she said as she reached the door. "Elena's father called my office this morning. He wanted to offer me a deal to ensure he was back in our good graces. He offered to personally ensure you never find work in this city again. I told him his help wasn't necessary. You did that work for us 5 years ago." She walked out without looking back. Marcus stayed in the chair for a long time, listening to the muffled sounds of a city that no longer knew his name. He walked out of the building and onto the street, blending into the crowd of thousands of people rushing toward their own lives. He walked past the high-end boutiques and the glass towers, but no one turned to look at him. No one whispered his name. Across town, in the highest office of the Newsom Tower, Maya stood at the window watching the sunset. She felt no rush of adrenaline, no spike of joy. She simply felt the profound, heavy peace of a woman who had finally stopped shrinking herself to fit into a small man's world. She picked up her phone and dialed her father. "It's done," she said. "And how do you feel, Maya?" Ronald asked. "I feel like myself," she replied, a quiet smile finally touching her lips. "I think it's time we started that new foundation, the one that helps women who don't have a billionaire father to back them up." The story of Marcus Walker ended that day, but the story of Maya Newsom was only just beginning. She had turned the dirt of his betrayal into the foundation of her own empire, and as the city lights flickered on below her, she knew she would never hide her light again.